Future Happiness by Train by Warren L. Armstrong. The train stopped so abruptly that some of the coal from the caboose behind the engine was propelled forward and hit the driver. 2 carriages further back, the young couple were thrown from their seats in the compartment, narrowly avoiding falling onto the kindly-looking elderly gentleman sitting opposite. Following profuse apologies, the youngsters retook their seats. Shortly afterwards, the locomotive continued its journey. The saintly octogenarian had previously noticed their extremely sad and harrowed demeanour, and took the opportunity of their unconventional introduction to inquire if he could be of any assistance. A silence followed, in which the juvenile's elderly companion observed the girl to be wrestling with her emotions. She eventually seemed to find courage and commenced her explanation. "We are eloping so that we can start our future together, and are hoping that this train will speed us away from my father and set us free. For the first few years of my life I don't think I could have been happier. My father was always distant, and I regarded him with some fear. However, my mother was both wonderful and kind, much as you are." The mature gentleman smiled in recognition and gratitude at the compliment, and slowly waved his hand for her to continue. The bride-to-be recommenced. "My mother was always happy and gave me such love. We spent a lot of time together, and from her I learned a great many things. She very patiently taught me how to read and write, to count, play the piano, and to sew. We used to spend a lot of time in our large garden, where I learned about a wide variety of flowers and other creatures, such as the rabbits and squirrels that romped across the lawns, and the colourful butterflies that gracefully fluttered through the air. I will never forget one occasion when I was out playing with a friend and fell over, grazing my knee. My mother heard my gentle sobbing and came out to investigate. On seeing my distress, she rushed over and gave me a warm cuddle till I had calmed down. Then she personally bathed the wound and placed a clean dressing on it. This is such a special memory for me, as she died shortly afterwards. I was 10 years old. From that point my father controlled my life, and I rapidly became miserable. He employed a governess who took over my education. When I made mistakes or failed to learn my lesson, she reported this, and he beat me with a leather strap. I used to cry myself to sleep every night, and feared the consequences if I should encounter him at any point. At other times he would go away on business and leave me alone with my tutor for lengthy periods. In his absence she continued my harsh treatment, replacing the leather strap with a metal ruler, which she used to rap me over the knuckles with. On my father's return she would provide a lengthy report on my progress, which was always followed by another beating. On one occasion my back bled so much that I couldn't wear a dress for 3 days. The listening angel perceived that she was experiencing great difficulty, the recounting of her unhappy life seemingly stirring such strong negative emotions, which were clearly displayed on her deeply furrowed brow. He patiently waited, and after an interval she recommenced. One day my father took me to the usual church service that was a feature of every Sunday morning. I dreaded this, taking care to hide the bruises and cuts that I was so desperately ashamed of. One morning I was lost to my miserable thoughts when a young man sitting next to me secretly smiled at me. He repeated this very welcome gesture several times, and at future weekly services I inevitably found myself seated next to him. My heart began to soar in anticipation of seeing him, and I started to look forward to the religious events. After many weeks he surreptitiously passed me a note with a location and time for a meeting, suggesting that I bring a small suitcase with me. He wrote that he had fallen in love with me and asked to have my hand in marriage. I slipped it back to him and gently nodded my head in case I attracted my father's attention with an unusual gesture to a stranger. I arrived at the appointed hour, which was very early this morning, to find that my fiancé had a carriage and horse waiting, which he had borrowed from his parents. Following a brief embrace, we quickly proceeded to the train station, and here you find us making our escape. At that point the door to the carriage apartment was violently thrust open, and the young lady's father filled the aperture. The elderly gentleman watched her instantly move to the corner of the end of the long bench seat towards the window, cowering in abject fear. Then she turned the handle of the external door next to her and stepped outside. Her youthful companion gave a high-pitched whimper and stood up. He looked sorrowfully at his erstwhile angelic companion and followed his beloved. The father furiously stared at the gap in the compartment's wall and looked down at the position occupied by the saintly personage, to find that he had vanished.